On the 23rd of September, after searching for 3 long months, 4 of the Nazgûl finally entered the Shire, the one named Baggins and the one ring that he carried, which had been missing for Sauron for over 3,000 years, was presumably within reach. But despite not even knowing that he was initially being pursued, Frodo managed to escape the Shire and the Nazgûl. In this video, we ask the question, how did the Nazgûl allow Frodo to escape the Shire? Okay, as I just said, at dawn on the 23rd, 4 of the Nazgûl, led by Khamul, entered the Shire. The 9 Nazgûl had defeated the rangers who were guarding Sarn Ford the previous evening, and while the Witch King and the other 4 drove away the remnants of their foes, Khamul had the important task of finding Baggins and taking back the One Ring. Khamul was especially suited to this task. Of all the Nazgûl, with the exception of the Witch King, it said that he could sense the One Ring the best. Using the maps and notes taken from Saruman's spies, by the evening, Khamul had reached Hobbiton where Baggins lived. At this point in time, Frodo had sold Bag End and was preparing to move to Crickhollow in Buckland. He had delayed his departure on account of Gandalf being delayed. Unknown to Frodo, Gandalf had been taken prisoner by Saruman, but on the 23rd, Frodo felt that he could delay no longer. Merry and Fredegar Bolger had already left with Frodo's luggage, but he, Sam, and Pippin decided to have one last meal at Bag End. Obviously, at this point in time, Frodo has absolutely no idea that the Nazgûl have entered the Shire and are actively searching for him. So it seems like Frodo should be easy prey for the Nazgûl, but thanks to some good fortune and bravery on the account of some of the hobbits, Frodo manages to escape the Shire. Our first close call is in Hobbiton itself. While taking a short evening walk, Frodo overhears a conversation between Hamfast Gamgee, the old gaffer, and Khamul. Frodo can't hear Khamul, but he can hear the gaffer's answers. The gaffer says Frodo had already left for Buckland that morning. Khamul then leaves without continuing up to Bag End, presuming that Frodo is no longer there. This was a double stroke of luck for Frodo. For one, his decision not to leave until evening meant that he didn't have a chance encounter with Khamul along the road before he was aware that someone was looking for him. When Frodo then does leave, he mostly stays off the main paths and was careful when he was aware someone was approaching. But secondly, the gaffer wasn't doing this to protect Frodo. Sam later reveals that the gaffer genuinely believed that Frodo, Sam, and Pippin had left with Merry and Fredegar that morning. The fact that the gaffer wasn't lying probably helped convince Khamul that Frodo had actually left, and for that reason, he did not bother to check Bag End. Of course, that wasn't Frodo's only run-in with Khamul. I just mentioned that Frodo, now knowing that he was being looked for, was now careful. So the next day, when Frodo and his companions were on the path to Woody End, they get off the road when they hear an approaching horse. Khamul doesn't see them, but once again, he's good at sensing the One Ring, so he does stop near them. Unfortunately for Khamul, his powers are much weaker during the daylight, so he suspects that his One Ring senses tingling is perhaps just a false alarm, and he rides off. But Khamul gets another chance. That evening, the hobbits are in Woody End and are singing a song, their fear of the mysterious Black Rider having faded. At the end of the song, Frodo tells the others to be quiet as he hears the sound of approaching hooves, and the hobbits hide. Once again, they spot a Black Rider, but this time it's night. Khamul's powers are stronger, and he's probably heard the hobbits singing. He dismounted from his horse, and after a brief moment, he starts moving towards the hobbits. Frodo has evaded him thus far, but it seems like his luck is about to run out. Except it doesn't. At this very moment, the sound of singing fills the forest. Khamul immediately gets on his horse and rides off because the voices belong to none other than elves. Frodo has encountered Gildor and Glorion, and a wandering company of elves. Even if you ignore the fact that Gildor has a number of elves with him, Gildor refers to himself as an exile of the House of Finrod. So he's probably from Valinor, a high elf who saw the light of the two trees, and therefore a dangerous foe for any of the Nazgûl. While Frodo and his companions are surrounded by elves, Khamul obviously wants nothing to do with them. The next morning, the elves are gone, but Frodo is clear of the Nazgûl for a while. The presence of the elves during the night shielded the One Ring from Khamul's senses, and the Nazgûl probably didn't want to linger too close to the elves due to the risk of being assailed. And one would presume that the elves made sure the surrounding area was safe before leaving Frodo behind. That being said, later that day, Frodo was still close enough to hear Khamul call for one of his fellow Nazgûl. Yet once again, luck is on Frodo's side. He and his companions arrive to Bamfalon, Farmer Maggot's farm, and Pippin, being familiar with Maggot, wants to visit him. There they learn that Maggot has been visited by Khamul, and that Frodo had just narrowly missed him. Maggot, much like the Gaffer, doesn't have accurate information about Frodo and tells Khamul that he's still in Hobbiton. Khamul says this isn't true and that Baggins must be nearby, and then Maggot basically just tells him to piss off. Frodo begins moving north, first hidden in Farmer Maggot's cart, and then on foot when they encounter Merry along the road. They reach the Buckleberry Ferry and push it off towards the eastern bank of the river, and upon reaching the other side, Merry notices movement back on the western bank. Khamul, once again, has arrived moments too late, and now he has bigger problems. The only other way to cross the river is the Brandywine Bridge, 10 miles to the north. On top of that, the Elvish waters of the Brandywine act as a barrier against Khamul sensing the One Ring. No longer being able to sense the One Ring meant that Khamul had to start from square one. Also, even entering Buckland itself proved a challenge. It was guarded by a gate, so Khamul and 2 others had to sneak inside. Once inside, they couldn't simply ask for Baggins due to the possibility of raising an alarm against them. Obviously, they shouldn't be there. So by the time they located Crickhollow on the 28th, Frodo had been gone for 2 whole days. He had left behind a decoy, Fredegar Bolger, so when Khamul eventually raided Crickhollow on the 30th, he had no idea that Frodo was already in Bree. Against the odds, Frodo had escaped the Shire. So was Khamul just incompetent, or was Frodo extremely lucky? Well, perhaps a bit of both. Certainly, Khamul had some poor timing, but mostly through no fault of his own. He arrived at Hobbiton just before Frodo was planning on leaving. He seemingly found Frodo in Woody End, but was forced to flee because elves showed up at that exact moment, and he arrived at the Buckleberry Ferry merely moments too late. If Frodo had left Hobbiton slightly earlier, Khamul might have caught him on the road. If he found Frodo in Woody End a few minutes earlier, he could have snatched the One Ring before the elves arrived. If he had gotten to the Buckleberry Ferry a few minutes earlier, he could have caught Frodo before he crossed the river. One must also remember that this was supposed to be a stealth mission. The Shire was too big to assail, and doing so might cause the Ring-Bearer to go underground. Khamul and his 3 companions were supposed to get in, grab the One Ring, and get out while the Witch King and the other 4 Nazgûl drove off the Rangers, presumably to keep them from regrouping and then summoning more help. But unfortunately for Khamul, his stealth mission was blown right away when Frodo overheard his conversation with the Gaffer. And it became even worse when Gildor found Frodo, because Gildor dispatched messages to other wandering companies of elves, to Dom Bombadil, to Aragorn in Bree, and to Elrond in Rivendell. They all became aware of Frodo and made efforts to help him, and in the case of Elrond, he later unleashed Glorfindel on the Nazgûl, knowing that the Nazgûl would not dare to stand against him. That all being said, Khamul could have been more thorough. He takes the Gaffer's word and chooses not to search Bag End. If he had done so, he would have found Frodo and the One Ring. The next day, when he's near to Frodo on the road, he clearly senses something as he does actually stop, but instead of searching the area, he decides his senses are off and rides away. If Khamul had been a little more curious on both of these occasions, the history of Middle-earth could have turned out very different. But as I said at the start of the video, thanks to a lot of luck, and hobbits like the Gaffer and Farmer Maggot cooperating with the Nazgûl as little as possible, Frodo was able to escape the Shire. Yes, he got unlucky, but Khamul's time in the Shire reflected rather poorly on him. He had a horse, he had the element of a surprise, and he screwed it all up. What's more amusing is that when Khamul and his companions raided Crickhollow on the 30th, the Witch King and the 4 other Nazgûl were already in Bree, and were already aware that Frodo was there. In that moment, Khamul might have believed that he finally had the Ring-Bearer cornered. Instead, he was acting on information that was already several days old, and all attacking Crickhollow did was raise Buckland against them, forcing them to flee. That's some cartoon incompetence right there. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. Piecing together the Hunt for the Ring is like putting together a puzzle. We get some information from the Lord of the Rings itself, some information from the Unfinished Tales, and then information from the Reader's Companion which has canon details that don't appear in the Unfinished Tales. It's kind of interesting looking at things from the perspective of the Nazgûl, seeing what they knew and what they didn't, and how that affected their decision making during the Hunt for the Ring. Cheers, farewell, and remember, Khamul basically did the male version of looking for something, and that's why Sauron died.